So good morning, everybody. So we're doing our weekly ESSERF now / CRF meeting. So we did bring Stan back again this week because we've had a number of questions, and so what I'll say is that a lot of questions are, so they're very similar, but sometimes they are nuanced, a bit nuanced from other questions, but. So generally speaking, so I encourage everybody to ask questions. I can't say we'll be able to answer every question this morning, but we will answer the ones that we can. And then the other ones we're sending over to the rest of the team and down to the controller's office to get confirmation on whether costs are allowable. And I do want to also let everybody know this morning we have, and hopefully I pronounced your name right, but Rui, who is assisting Stan or helping out Stan, however you want to say it. But so I don't know if you want to take a moment to introduce yourself, Rui.
Sure. I've been working with Stan as a consultant in the Department of Education school construction program. So he and I have been working together for a few years now, and he wanted someone to pick up the invoice part of this whole process. So he's reviewing applications and asking you questions and approving the budget and then approving your final budget. And I'll be reviewing the invoices that you send in, checking back on the final budget approval, and then letting you know when I've sent the invoices along for you to be reimbursed.
Thank you, Rui. So do you have, anything up front, Stan, that you want to actually say? I know I did get a more general question that you may be able to answer as well through email that I haven't been able to respond to or send on to you just for clarification, and so I figured this would be a good place to kind of ask that question as well. But do you have anything that you want to kind of lead off with?
Sure, yes, and thank you for having me today, because hopefully the more we get the information out, the more people will be able to submit their initial budget and application and not have to be kicked back. Right now, just as an update, I believe it's 87 have been approved out of the 286. They need to be submitted by the end of August. So those individuals that are waiting till the end of August will not get their notification until that much later, because it'll be impossible to process all of those in as timely a manner as I have the previous 87. So 87 is the good news. I have probably had to delete close to 100 applications from individuals, and not to be too repetitious as to what I indicated last week, but I am still getting applications where the superintendent is not signing, or the director, or the heads of schools, someone else is signing. The person that's highest up the food chain in that school system needs to be signing that. The other big reason that some of them are kicked out has to do with the budget template, and the fact that a number of systems still do not know how to access the application, which was sent out to all of superintendents and heads of schools, I believe, July 17th. Just a second, I just thought of something. I wanted to write it down. So the superintendent's office has that information as to how to access the application. Some systems are sending me their own budget, which is not the budget template within the application, and of course we cannot accept that. One of, actually two areas within the budget template that people are filling out are still very problematic is some individuals are not explaining how they intend to use the money. For example, they may request $90,000 in equipment under category G for technology and underline F, but under the descriptor, they're not indicating what the money is intended for. We have to know the purpose for the expenditure that you're proposing. So those are automatically kicked back. And when they're sent back, I notify the administrator, usually the superintendent, and you have to reapply. You have to fill out the whole information again. The other area that seems to be very problematic is when you are in Excel on the budget template, some of the information I'm getting on the description for the usage of the money, all X's appear on the budget I'm getting. In researching that, it is my understanding that when the person fills out the budget, they are not filling it out in the text Excel box. They're filling it out in the accounting cell box. So therefore, all X's appear in the information I'm receiving. So if someone is filling that out and they're not familiar with Excel, they ought to find somebody who is more familiar so that it's filled out appropriately. So those are some of the big areas right now that people's budgets are not approved.
So Stan, one question I think what you're just talking about right now, there's some other questions and we'll get to those. But so somebody's saying that there's limited space in a note section on the budget template. Can we send an attachment with more detail?
No. And there's plenty of space. If you're filling it out correctly, there's plenty of space. I have had some systems under the space, under the category, have had 4 or 5 lines explaining. And those have all come through without a problem. So I don't know what it is back in the office where the applicant is filling it out, but I've had a number where there's been 2 lines filled out and I can just make out the top of the 3rd line. So something has to be done differently in that regards. Someone said you're supposed to double click it on the right. I'm not sure about that. But I've had no problem with the majority that have sent in, and they're have had more than 1 or 2 lines, and they've come through.
Okay. So we did get a question around, do we email Rui directly the invoice or send it to Stan? And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Stan, but we said at least for the first invoice to email the invoice to you first, and then you will forward it on to Rui.
Yes, unfortunately, but that is what has been decided. So all the invoices are sent to me, the initial invoice, and what I'll do is I forward it to Rui. I look at it, I forward it to Rui, and in her email that I sent to Rui, I will CC the individual who sends it and indicate to them that Rui now is the person that they should be connecting with on the invoices and the receipts. That's another area. Initially, people were sending the invoice, but they were not sending the receipts and documentation to support the expenditure. And in the GAN, which is the grant notification that I send out to the superintendent, I did include attachments, and those attachments are very clear on what should be included on the receipts and the documentation. It has to start out with CR 1001, I believe, but then you need to use the category, which is A through G, and you need to use the account number. If it's technology, it would be 5,000 to 7,000. That all needs to be on the receipt. Talking about receipts, we received one yesterday where an individual applied in their budget $87,500 for a bus. When they sent me the invoice, they only subtracted $22,000 from the invoice, but the receipt was for $87,500. And in talking with that individual, they had already had in their budget $65,000 for a small bus, and they wanted a larger bus. So therefore, they only charge CRF for the difference, because you cannot supplant something that you already have in your budget with CRF money. The reason I'm even mentioning that is we're going to email that individual and say, okay, that's great, you did it right, but you ought to denote that on your receipt so we have that information when it's audited. And we're also going to email her and indicate, if you want that extra $60,000, which is out there floating around now, in your final budget, you ought to use that money for some other proposed expenditure in your description under a different account.
So,
Did I explain that right, Rui? Rui, did I put you to sleep?
Yes, I think so. I do want to say that I'm awaiting my Maine state government laptop and to sign my contract. My hope is that I'll be going to Augusta in the next day or two to get that all straightened out. So I certainly will let people know kind of where I'm at and what I'm thinking, but I can't officially pass your invoices on until I get the go-ahead from Dan.
And to follow up on that, so people will, because we've had a few emails wanting to know, when will I get my money? And once we go through the process of approving invoices with backup receipts and documentations with the correct numbers on them, that is then CC'd to Elaine Babb, who is the Chief Financial Officer at the DOE. I believe I have that title correctly. And once she looks it over, she then sends it, I believe, to the accounting department. Tyler might know that more than myself.
Yep, she's gonna
And
send it
then
out.
they cut the check. So you're looking at, from the time that Rui approves it, you're probably looking at a week. So if we don't have the applications till the end of August, and there's 150 in one day, it's going to take me time to get through them, particularly if some are deleted because of incorrectly filling them out. So once you're approved, then I can accept invoices. You can see it has a domino effect on when you'll get paid. So the sooner the app is in, the better off you are.
So thanks, Stan. And so you had mentioned something, and this actually was a pretty good lead into this question that I did receive. You know, talking about, so the initial application needs to be in by the end of this month, but I got a question in my email around, you know, so as you're pretty well aware, Stan, things are moving pretty fast for the school districts, and so, you know, they're submitting their budget with their best estimate of what they're going to be using the money for, and things are changing pretty fast. And so the actual question is around, can they only amend it once? And you know, so in doing that, you know, things may change multiple times along the way, even between now and the end of September. And so how should they best deal with those changes as they occur?
Good, great question. And I don't know how many people are old enough to remember that commercial on TV where the guy who made the donuts for Dunkin' Donuts, he used to go out in the morning and he'd see himself coming in the other side of the door because he was up all night and had to leave in the morning. And his expression was, got to make the donuts. So the reason I say that is originally we only had one budget, one and done. Dan Shooter was very good about allowing a final budget the end of September, with the realization that a lot of things will change between today and the end of September. However, there needs to be a cutoff point. And if people keep continually resubmitting budgets, it's going to be impossible for me or anyone else to keep approving them. So I think the wisest course here is to get your initial budget in with your best estimate of your needs. Then when school starts and you have different priorities and different needs, redo your budget only if it changes. You don't have to submit a second budget or a final budget. Only if your budget lines change. And if it was me, I would wait till the middle of September or so before I submitted my final budget. But after you submit your final budget, we can't accept any more. I'd be like the guy making the donuts. So initial budget, final budget, the end of September, only if you're changing what you had in your initial budget. Changes cannot be made after that. We have had one person that sent in the initial budget, and about a week later, they sent in their final budget. So that's it. That's their final budget. That's what final means. Sorry, don't mean to be cruel about it, but there has to be a cutoff point.
Thanks. And I don't, so there's a question in the chat, and I know it's come up before because he's asked it before. And I'm not sure if we talked about this directly yesterday when we met internally, Stan. And so I'm going to ask it, and you may not have the answer to it. But I think we were asking Shirley about this question. So utilizing CRF funds for paying for the FFCRA leave.
Yes, that's a question that has been sent to Shirley. Shirley is Shirley Brown. She's the assistant comptroller. She does a lot of the auditing, and she knows what is going to be allowable and not. So that's one of the 2, 4, 6, 9 questions that some of you have emailed me on, some as late as a week ago. And just as soon as I get my response, you will get the response. So I'm sorry it hasn't been as timely as everyone would like.
Thank you. So we're also getting a question, what's the difference between sending an invoice or a receipt? And so I think I can take this one. And so,
Good.
so the invoice is the actual, the invoice template for which we've created, and that's how you'll be submitting to get reimbursement back from us. And then when we're saying receipts, we need each individual receipt that you're asking for a reimbursement on. So, each vendor that you've purchased, items from, or if you're paying somebody for some allowable extra time, there's some additional information that we need on that. And so those are the receipts that we would need, and they would be attached to the invoice. And actually, I want to take a moment because I know there's been some confusion on, and I think this is kind of on us a little bit, and I don't know if we can fix it at this point. But so on the invoice, when you submit the invoice, it asks for your GASA number, and in the instructions it says that is on your grant award notification. And so in this, we may be able to update the instructions a little bit. So on your grant award notification, that is actually labeled as the federal award identification number. So it's, and this is just coming about because of the different terminology that we have to use with different pieces. So the feds require it to be called a federal award identification number versus the state's controller's office. When we submit information to them, they call it a GASA. So it's a bit of a labeling issue. And so I just want to make sure everybody aware, when you're being asked for that GASA number on your GAN, it's called the Federal Award Identification Number.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you
No,
off.
go ahead. I was actually going to look at the question, so go ahead, Stan.
Okay, which brings up, when you mentioned GASA, there is still, I've been working closely with Joanne Allen, who's been very helpful in a number of ways, but there is a DUN number, which I believe is Data Universal Number, something like that. Every district or every private school, etc., needs to have one. And if you don't have one, there is a process, and I believe it's on the application now. This was changed yesterday by Dan Schutter. There's now a question on it. What is your DUN number? And if you don't have one, there is a number for you to call to get it. But we do need that before you can receive your GAN.
And if I remember correctly, Joanne noted yesterday during our internal call that everybody who didn't have one, she had also reached out to inform them that we didn't see one for them, and to take that, to do that process. But we also included it on the application just as a backup.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the letter that Joanne sent out, she did get a number of people responding, but a lot did not. So that slows the process down by probably a couple days.
Yeah.
So please get your DUN number if you don't have it.
Thanks. And so we also have a question, is there a materiality limit for receipts? And so no, so if you're asking for reimbursement for an item, we need the receipt for that item, even if it was, for $1 or, for pennies. So we want every receipt, and so that's part of the requirement under these funds for our backup, is we have to request every receipt on every single invoice.
And that's for audited purposes. Not only might the state be audited, but also your local district may be audited. So you need to keep those receipts and send a copy to us.
So
It's not my requirement.
Yeah. Yeah, and so this was actually a requirement under this fund that was, I believe, was as part of the federal award to the state. So this isn't anything that the state has necessarily imposed. This is something that we have to enforce, that was imposed on us.
By the U.S. Treasury, I
Yeah.
believe,
Yeah.
where the monies came from.
Stan, do you know what date the actual email was sent out to superintendents with the letting them know that they could apply for the funding?
I don't, because I do not believe I was on staff. I only started, I think, the 20th of July, something like that. But I've been told it went out July 17th. But
Okay.
I may be wrong on that date. Maybe if Joanne's on, she might know, or someone might know that answer. But it was sometime in mid-July, is what I was told.
Yeah. So if we have a different answer, somebody will either put it in chat or speak
Joanne
up.
put it in chat as the
Okay.
24th.
Okay. Perfect.
It was the
Yeah.
24th?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm still only halfway through the chat, so
Okay, July 24th. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
so we're getting a question as to flexibility in the budgets. How, so in other federal grants, there's a, between categories, they can underspend or overspend by, I believe, 10%. And I'm sure Barbara will correct me if I'm wrong in that amount. But is there any flexibility between the budgeted categories in whether you underspend or overspend a category?
I believe that the answer is no. And that is why we put into effect the final budget in September. We talked about a 10% overrun, and it was decided it'd be better for superintendents and heads of schools, et cetera, to have a final budget in September. Now, maybe Joanne or someone else knows differently, but I do not believe there's any provision for a 10% or an overrun.
So we also got, so do you need a copy of the check as well, or just a copy of the invoice?
That's a good question.
Um,
Have you thought about that at all, Rui?
I have not. Off the top of my head, I would think that if the check number could be on the receipt, unless it's easier that people just make a copy of the check.
Certainly gives us more information
Yes.
and more documentation. So
I think that, I mean, so we would not be opposed to having the check being
No.
attached as well.
no. The other area we talked about last week, and I'm not an expert on this, and I don't know if Carolyn, I believe it's Carolyn Heller from Ellsworth. I don't know if she's on this chat today or not, but she seemed, she seemed to know a lot about time and effort as far as individuals that are hired to work extra hours. And I don't know, I don't want to put her on the spot. I don't know if she'd be willing to explain that a little bit, because that might be something that individuals might appreciate knowing how to do that.
Well,
that is, that's above my pay grade.
Oh, it
I'm
is.
saying that tongue in cheek. That's really, there's a webinar out there that Barb had done, and she's the expert, and it's very complicated. Depends on the number of funding sources as well as the schedule. There are several versions of time and effort documentation, and that's a whole presentation that's not something I really want to get into now, and we don't really have
Okay.
time for here.
Well, and so what I'll note, Stan, as well is, so Carolyn actually provided how she does some of that to both the Maine ASBO. So if you're a member of Maine ASBO, it's in their site. Plus, she also sent it through the listserv. And so if you're not part of either one of those, so if you're a business, so the listserv is for business managers. But if your business manager or somebody in your business staff isn't part of that listserv, then just reach out to me and we can add them to the listserv. And so, or I believe the rules around being a member of Maine ASBO, they change, to account for more of the business staff or business office staff. Some of those rules have kind of allowed for more members of the accounting staff to be members of Maine ASBO within a school unit that's a member. So so one of those two ways will, so hopefully you get it through one of those two ways. And you can also, so I think last week Carolyn provided her email if somebody wanted to reach out to her directly. And otherwise you can also ask me, and I do apologize. It will probably take me a couple days to get back to you. But so through one of those means, you can get that information that Carolyn had provided.
I've added my email to the chat.
Okay. Thank you, Carolyn.
You're welcome.
Now, Carolyn, not that I want to put you on the spot again. I hope I'm not. I believe I know what time and effort means, but could you succinctly in a few sentences just explain that?
Yeah, that I actually can do.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So the time and effort documentation is attesting to how the employee is spending their time. I've had a lot of trouble conveying that to some folks. They think that they're attesting to what the funding source, and they're not. For example, given that you are being paid with Title I funds, you are attesting to the fact that you are doing Title I activities.
Okay.
And generally either you're signing off on it or your direct supervisor would be signing off on it.
Does it mention the amount of money you've earned doing that task or?
No, it will vary. The version of the document will vary depending on the number of funding sources and the number of activities. So if you are a education technician that is special ed, but you also work in the library, and so in that case, you would have to provide a schedule showing how much of your time is spent doing activities that would be allowable under the local entitlement grant, the IDEA grant, versus the amount of time you're spending on activities that are funded through the general fund and not allowable under local entitlement. So there are a lot of moving pieces there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So I've got a couple of these are pretty simple. So questions in the chat. So we have a question: is vendor code the org ID starting with the VC? So what's listed in the CRF GAN when you get that is it says org SAU ID, and that is actually the vendor code. So again, that's a bit of a little bit of a labeling difference, and so because I think most business managers, anyways, know what their org ID is, either because of the uploads that they're doing to MEFs, or from looking at their 279. So when that says org SAU ID, that number that starts with VC probably looks a little foreign to them, and so that is actually your vendor code that's used to process your payments within the Department of Administrative Financial Services. And then we have an allowability question, Stan, and are we allowed to pay the teachers a stipend using CRF funds to incent teachers to do both in-person and distance learning? And I'm going to preface it with, it probably depends, but I don't, do you have a more in-depth answer that you might want to give?
Would you repeat that again?
So
The question?
are school districts allowed to pay their teachers a stipend using CRF funds to incent teachers to do both in-person and distance learning?
To assess teachers?
No, so incent. So, so teachers may not want, so teachers may be doing in-person. And so I'm assuming by this question and the certainly be corrected, and maybe they're also doing some work outside of their normal contract to also help out online students.
Okay, we've had a fair amount of questions around that whole area. And like you said, Tyler, it depends. What has been provided for me to respond to individuals is that if you have hourly employees, and this is a long answer, hourly employees like custodians, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, that you need to hire for a longer period of time to clean buses, to sanitize buses, etc. Yes, you may use that money if you budget it under benefits and salaries. You can get reimbursed under CRF. Teachers are not on a year-round contract. They normally work so many hours a day, so many days a year. If you need teachers to come in early before school starts, like the week before school, to make remote learning activities, to do areas that are caused by COVID-19 and are not in your school previous budget, then you can pay extra for extra work beyond, in the form of a stipend for teachers. If you have building principals that work a very abbreviated schedule, they may work a week before, a week after, and you need them to do a lot of extra planning and work because of COVID-19, you can pay them extra. If you have year-round employees, principals, that's contracts are for the year, they may get a month off in the summer, but theirs is for a year. Your business managers, yearly contracts, assistant superintendents, this money is not intended to pay extra to those year-round employees.
Thanks. And so
Don't shoot the messenger.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I mean, so there may, and so I think as Dan noted during our meeting, I don't know whether that was today or yesterday, some of these questions are coming in very nuanced. And so, if you have a particular situation that you don't see the exact situation that you have, you may have to ask that question to us directly. And just because some of these, what's occurring is so nuanced that it doesn't fit nicely into the one, something that we've already answered.
Right, that's an important point. Yep.
So we also have a question. I think is an important thing that, because we had talked about it quite a few times, and not necessarily in this group, but extensively. But so saying, I heard from an otherwise usually reliable source that there might be some way to accrue and charge the CRF funds for salaries that will occur after December 31st. My understanding was that that was absolutely not the case, but in light of that conversation, I wanted to confirm.
You're absolutely right. That is not the case.
Yeah.
All monies have to be expended by the end of December, December 30th, I believe. You cannot encumber salaries. If you want to hire an ed tech for the year, you cannot encumber that person's salary. It has to be paid up until December 30th. A corollary to that is individuals that are getting extra buses or vans. Those have to be on site, delivered, paid for by the end of December. If you're doing modifications in your school, building an isolation room for COVID-19 people that you feel have COVID-19, or if you're doing modifications to your gymnasium to make it a usable instructional space, the work has to be all completed, the bills all paid, it's the ability to be occupied by December 30th. You cannot pay up front and have that work continue into beyond December 30th.
And I know initially we were investigating some ways to kind of, you know, in hopes that we might be able to kind of, you know, work within that, and nothing quite, you know, nothing worked out. And so I don't know if that's where some of the, you know, some of, you know, like this person's question came from. But in the end, I mean, so it you know, all the, you know, it all has to occur before, and it's actually December 30th, not the 31st, just to note as well. I was even confused about that, you know, that 1 day difference early on. So we also have the question with, and I don't suspect you're going to have the answer, Stan, and I'll ask probably like Barbara or maybe even Joanne if she wants to chime in on this question. But I'm you know, with our federal people who deal with this on a daily basis, they may have a better understanding or their general procedures. So with SAM.gov vendor checking, if the vendor's name doesn't come up on the .gov website with a record, can we assume that we can use them, or are we required to get the vendor's DUN number and search them by DUN number?
Someone else will have to answer
Yeah.
that.
So I don't know if Barbara, you what's been your general guidance on that? Have you provided guidance on that in the past? Oh, she was here. So we'll have to get back to you on that, because I'm not sure we have any of the people who generally process who do those checks on the call currently. So Clint's asking, if paying on an employee, do we attach the power or time and effort with the invoice? So it's actually not. So what I'll say, and Stan, you can certainly again supplement anything you want. It's not when you're doing a reimbursement for the person, it's not the PAR that we're going to want with the invoice, because the PAR doesn't actually provide any of the accounting information. We're going to, you know, I think that's where some of what Carolyn provided through both Maine ASBO and on the listserv, she provided, you know, information that she may, you know, has provided in the past. And especially if you're able to do a semi-annual certification on the employee, you wouldn't be doing that until the period until the end of the period or after the period has ended. So you wouldn't be able to actually provide, if it's a semi-annual, if you're able to do a semi-annual certification, you wouldn't be able to provide it. And realizing PAR, you would be doing certainly on a more frequent basis. But we need to actually see the accounting information, which the PAR wouldn't have on it. But do you want, I mean, so if they're doing a PAR, do you want that as well, Stan, as part of the invoice? Is that going to assist you in what you're doing?
What do you think, Rui? Did Rui leave me?
Well, she's still on, but she
I
might.
didn't leave you. Sorry, I muted myself. I'm concerned, I guess, that we ask people to provide so much stuff that it's going to be burdensome to them. So I think there's a real balance between what's critical for us to have from an accounting perspective, not us doing the accounting, but someone following up behind us doing accounting. And I'm not sure that the PAR would be of that much benefit, but I guess an accountant needs to tell us that.
Well, and so I think, I mean, so probably for the invoicing, it's not going to provide as much value, but they still do need to do them, because as part of the compliance checks further on, that may be something that does get asked for from the employee or from the school district.
But not about the invoice for these funds.
Right. So that might not, I mean, I don't see that it's necessarily going to provide any value to the invoice itself for you to be able to process them.
Right.
So, okay. So Joy is asking a question: as a CTE school to limit sharing of tools, can we use the CRF funds to purchase tools to be assigned to specific students? So I don't.
Okay.
Go ahead, Stan.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. No?
No,
Sorry.
I was actually going to say go ahead, so.
What is allowable if there are additional supplies, materials, and tools that are needed that typically students share, and you no longer want them to share with others, whether it's tools in the electrical shop, or it's textbooks, students share textbooks, or even crayons in kindergarten class. You may request additional supplies in those appropriate lines if it's because it's caused by COVID-19 and you need, or you desire to have each child have their own book, their own crayon, or their own hammer. So the answer is yes.
Okay. And so we got quite a few comments from our business managers saying, please don't require the check to be attached. So we did get one note that, a lot of times if you've done the check stub correctly, all the information from the check will actually be on the check stub. And so some requests to also only require the check number.
Okay. You okay with that, Rui?
Yes.
Okay.
I would just caution the business managers, make sure you have the backup information in case you're audited or it's requested by the state sometime down the road. And I'm sure they will.
So let's see. So we also got I think there may be a question in here. So some districts went with the shortened days for students to give teachers more preparation time for remote learners. The ones that didn't, to this district in particular, have now been requested by the MEA to pay more in a stipend to compensate for the extra work. So I think, the underlying question may be, if they shortened their if they shortened their days to give teachers more prep time, and now they're being requested by the MEA to pay more in a stipend to those teachers, is that going to be allowable? And I think that's fairly nuanced, but if but
Well, I would think if the district had a reduced day for teachers so they could have time for planning, then there's the answer right there. The day has not been increased.
right. And so that was kind of my thought. But so thank you. So Stacy's noting we need a DUNS number for each vendor. I thought Stan was saying that we need to put our DUNS number on invoices. So part of it, so Stacy, you need to have a DUNS number in order for us to finalize to approve your application. The other conversation around the DUNS number was being able to check any vendor that you're paying. You know, can't be identified in the SAMS database as being a non-allowable vendor for federal funds. And so the question that we have that we haven't answered yet is, what if you look for that vendor and you can't find them by name? Do you also have to do a check by the DUNS number? And that's the question that we haven't answered yet. So then we got a follow-up question.
I think I want to make sure that the one you just read, she wasn't thinking that my explanation on the receipts and the documents, you do not need the DUN number on the receipts and documents that you're sending with the invoice. What you need on that is the code A through G, and then the account, whether it's technology, 5,000, or salary and benefits, whatever those accounts are. That's what you need on the receipts and the documentation with the invoice, not the DUN number.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that wasn't the question.
So then the last question that's currently in the chat, which is good because we're just a couple of minutes before the end of time. So what documentation other than a GL listing would be submitted for a stipend? What if we wire money instead of issuing a check? So I think, and this is where both in the Maine ASBO listing on their website and in our listserv, Carolyn provided some good information as to what she's provided in the past for other federal awards as part of a compliance check on how to show what was actually paid out of a particular federal fund for backup on that, which instead of doing it as a compliance check, we're now doing as part of the invoicing. And I do know you can, I've, working with some business managers and other school districts, there is a way to show the actual amounts that have been paid by different periods out of your accounting system as well. Okay. And so it's getting noted that I missed a question. So anyways, I don't know if I can find it while we're on right now, but I can repost.
Tyler?
Yeah.
Do you want to know the question is, if you stay in the same category, can you overspend equipment, for example, and have it covered by extra in contracted services?
Right. And so Stan, this is like, so say they have money in they have some money for salaries, they have some money for contracted services, they have money for supplies, and they have money for equipment, and say they don't end up needing the money for salaries, can they then move that to contracted services? Is that an allowable move?
Well, I think that's the same question we had before about the 10%. My understanding is you have to stay within that dollar amount within those lines.
Yeah.
That's my understanding. When you received your original allocation, it was based on different categories. I think there were 21 to give you your allocation. You can spend that allocation however you want to within the categories and the lines. But once you determine your budget in those lines, it's my understanding you have to live within those. But we may want to run that up the flagpole by with somebody. Who would know that? Shirley, or would that be somebody else question?
Well, and that's so yeah. So I think, I mean, we can talk about it internally, and maybe we do send that to well, we can see if we need to ask Shirley as well. But let's talk about it offline internally, and then we can provide some clarification around that, maybe in the FAQ.
Good. But I guess I'd say, what's the purpose of having those accounts in the first place if we can move money around? But I'm not opposed to that. Believe me.
Yeah.
Would whatever makes it better for districts to handle this COVID-19 situation. But at this time, I've been told, and I forget by whom, you have to live within those lines.
Right, and so I do, so generally speaking, with other federal grants, moving within a category, or moving money from salaries to contracted services would be, you do have that 10% threshold to work with, but I think getting clarity for this particular federal fund, because it's not, especially where it's not this isn't money coming from or being reviewed by US Ed, and it's being reviewed by the Treasury. Getting some clarity on that would probably be good.
Right. The reason I mentioned what I did was because in initial discussions, when we talked about a 10% leeway, et cetera, it was decided to have initial budget and then a final budget. So I think the final budget was the intent to have people line up what they felt they would need for expenses by the end of by September 30th. But I'm certainly not opposed to explore that some more to make it better for school systems.
Yeah. All right. So I do know we still had a couple of questions kind of in that have come in. But I'm gonna, because we are at 11 o'clock, and so respecting the fact that other people may have scheduled other meetings, I'm gonna end this meeting. But I do want to thank everybody for coming. And if we may have Stan and Rui come back again next week, depending on, we'll see how things are going with the applications and invoices. And they may have some at that point, some kind of common issues or concerns that are coming with the invoices, and maybe providing some more clarity around. So it seems to be some clarity needed on when paying people what to provide. So we'll see if we can provide some more clarity around that as well. And of course,
I think it's helpful to get the word out as much as possible. So I'm certainly not opposed to doing this every Wednesday, as long as there's a need.
Yep. So I'm gonna stop recording, and thank you everybody for coming.